You are exhausted, feeling like you are running on a treadmill where your life never truly changes, even after reading and applying so much knowledge about the universe. What if I prove to you right now through quantum physics that your reality is locked because the system has forced you to read a corrupted script since the day you were born? There is an invisible block dictating your problems, and the great hidden question is this: what is the only real way to break this encryption in your brain today? That exhaustion you feel is not just physical. It comes from repeating the same internal patterns without noticing. You think you are choosing, but most of your reactions were installed long ago. Your attention keeps being pulled in the same directions, reinforcing the same version of reality again and again. It feels personal, but it's patterned. And if it's patterned, it can be seen. The moment you begin to see it clearly, even slightly, the code starts to loosen. You know that horrible feeling of always being on alert, with constant anxiety in your chest, as if a financial or emotional catastrophe could happen at any moment. The system does not use iron bars to imprison you. It uses your own biology, forcing your brain waves to operate in a state of pure fear that blocks any change in your magnetic field. This state is so familiar that most people don't even question it anymore. It feels normal to wake up already tense, to check your phone and immediately feel behind, to move through the day as if something is about to go wrong. But this isn't your natural state. It's a programmed baseline. Your body is being trained to prioritize survival over creation, reaction over awareness. And when your entire system is locked into survival mode, your perception of reality becomes extremely narrow. In this frequency, your brain is not looking for possibilities. It is scanning for threats. Every situation gets filtered through a single question: is this safe or dangerous? That might sound useful, even necessary, but there's a hidden cost. When your nervous system is constantly activated, it shuts down the very parts of you responsible for clarity, intuition, and long-term vision. You stop seeing options. You stop imagining different outcomes. Reality starts to feel fixed, heavy, and unchangeable. Notice how this plays out in small, almost invisible ways. A delayed message feels like rejection. A bill feels like collapse. A simple decision feels overwhelming. These are not just random reactions. They are signals of a body that has been conditioned to expect instability. And when that expectation becomes constant, it begins to shape what you actually experience. Not because something mystical is forcing it, but because your attention, your choices, and your energy are all being directed by fear. There's also a physical layer to this that most people ignore. When you stay in this heightened state, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tighten, your heart rhythm loses coherence. Your body starts producing stress hormones as a default setting. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. Your body signals danger to your mind, and your mind reinforces danger back to your body. Together, they lock you into a version of reality where stress feels permanent. Pause for a moment and check something simple. Without trying to change anything, just notice your shoulders. Are they relaxed or slightly raised? Notice your jaw. Is it loose or holding tension? These small signals reveal more than any abstract idea. They show you the frequency your body is operating on right now. And that frequency is not neutral. It is actively shaping how you interpret everything around you. The system doesn't need to control every external event. It only needs to keep you internally unstable. Because once your internal state is dominated by fear, you will do the rest automatically. You will seek out information that confirms your worries. You will avoid risks that could expand your life. You will stay attached to patterns that feel familiar, even if they drain you. In this way, your own biology becomes the enforcement mechanism. And here's the subtle part that often goes unnoticed. This survival frequency creates the illusion of urgency. Everything feels like it must be solved immediately. There's no space to observe, no gap between stimulus and response. You react before you even realize you had a choice. That's how the loop sustains itself, not through force, but through speed. Take a slow breath right now, deeper than your usual one. Not to relax completely, just enough to interrupt the pattern. As you exhale, notice if there's even a slight shift in your chest. That tiny change is important. It shows that your state is not fixed. It can move, and if it can move, it can be directed. But this is where many people unknowingly fall into a trap. They recognize this tension, this constant alertness, and immediately try to escape it. They try to force calm, to impose control, to push their mind into a different state as quickly as possible. It feels like the right move, but there's a hidden error in that approach, one that quietly keeps the same cycle running underneath a different surface. To try to escape this pressure, you meditate, visualize, and try to force your mind. But there is a brutal and silent mistake that almost everyone makes when trying to change their life, a mistake that actually hands your vital energy on a silver platter to the creators of the simulation. In a moment, I will show you the only action that cancels this, but first, you need to understand where your creative power is leaking away. The mistake is not that you're trying to improve your state. The mistake is the hidden tension behind the effort. When you sit down to meditate while internally thinking, "I need to fix myself," your body doesn't register peace, it registers pressure. When you visualize a better future while feeling desperate for it to happen, your system stays anchored in lack. On the surface, it looks like you're doing everything right. Underneath, you're reinforcing the same survival frequency in a more sophisticated way. This is how the loop becomes harder to detect. Instead of obvious stress, it disguises itself as self-development. You tell yourself you're evolving, but your nervous system is still tight, still chasing, still trying to control the outcome. And reality responds not to your words or intentions alone, but to the state you are actually embodying. If that state is urgency, even your most positive practices become extensions of the same pattern. Think about how often you approach change with a sense of not enough, not calm enough, not focused enough, not successful enough. That subtle dissatisfaction becomes the fuel behind your actions. And here's the paradox. The more you try to escape that feeling by force, the more you confirm it as real. Your attention keeps returning to what is missing. And in doing so, you keep collapsing a version of reality where something is always out of reach. There's also a deeper layer that most people overlook. When you try to dominate your mind, you create internal resistance. One part of you is pushing for control while another part tightens in response. This inner friction drains energy quickly. It's like pressing the gas and brake at the same time. You don't move forward, but you burn through your resources. Over time, this leads to exhaustion, confusion, and the sense that nothing is really working, even after all the effort. Pause for a moment and notice something subtle. The next time you try to fix your thoughts, observe the tone you're using with yourself. Is it patient, or is it slightly aggressive? Is there space, or is there pressure? That tone matters more than the technique. Because your body listens to tone, not theory. If the tone carries urgency, your system stays locked in the same loop, no matter how advanced the method seems. There's another leak happening quietly in the background, attachment to results. You meditate expecting calm, you visualize expecting outcomes, you try to stay positive, expecting reality to reward you. And when those expectations aren't met quickly, frustration creeps in. That frustration is not neutral, it pulls you right back into the frequency of control and lack. Without noticing, you've shifted from observing your experience to negotiating with it. Try something different for a few seconds. Close your eyes not to change anything, but just to notice what is already there. The thoughts, the tension, the background noise of your mind. Don't label it as good or bad, just observe. If discomfort shows up, let it be present without trying to remove it. This might feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because it removes the usual sense of control. But in that small moment, something important happens. The pressure to perform disappears. What you begin to see is that the real drain isn't your circumstances. It's the constant effort to reshape them from a state of tension. The more you push, the more you signal to your system that something is wrong right now. And as long as that signal is active, your perception of reality stays filtered through correction instead of clarity. This is why so many people feel stuck, even while doing everything they've been told should work. They are trying to escape the system using the same frequency that sustains it. It's not about doing more. It's about recognizing the quality of attention you're bringing into each moment. And once you start to see this clearly, a different question naturally begins to form. If forcing the mind and chasing outcomes only reinforce the loop, then what exactly is the mechanism that turns your attention into something solid? What is actually happening between the moment you observe something and the moment it feels real and unchangeable? Quantum mechanics has already proven that the electron only transforms into solid matter when someone observes it. In other words, physical matter needs your attention in order to exist. The system knows this better than anyone. The daily chaos, the headlines, and the crises are meticulously designed to steal your focus, forcing your own mind to collapse and solidify a reality of scarcity every single day. This idea might sound distant, almost abstract, but it becomes very practical when you bring it into your daily life. Think about how your morning begins. Before your body is fully awake, your attention is already being pulled into messages, notifications, news, problems. Each one of these is not just information, it is a potential line of focus, and the moment you engage with it emotionally, you are no longer just observing. You are participating in shaping a version of reality. The key is not that you are creating everything from nothing. It's that your attention acts like a selector. Out of countless possibilities, it locks onto specific patterns and reinforces them. When your focus is repeatedly drawn to stress, urgency, and lack, those patterns become more familiar, more dominant. They start to feel solid, as if they were always there, but in truth, they are being strengthened through repetition and emotional charge. Notice how quickly something small can become overwhelming. A single negative thought appears, and within seconds it connects to others. One concern turns into a chain reaction. Before you realize it, your entire state has shifted. Your body tightens, your breathing changes, your perspective narrows. What just happened is very close to what physics describes in principle. A field of possibilities collapsed into a single, dense experience. This doesn't mean that your thoughts magically create physical objects. It means your perception organizes reality in a way that feels concrete and unquestionable. Once something is perceived as real and solid, your behavior adapts to it. You make decisions based on it. You avoid, chase, or resist based on it. And through those actions, the pattern stabilizes even more. There's also a timing element that often goes unnoticed. The collapse doesn't happen slowly. It's fast, almost immediate. The gap between observing something and reacting to it is usually so small that it feels like one single movement. That's where the system operates most efficiently. If your reactions are automatic, your attention is predictable, and if your attention is predictable, the version of reality you experience becomes easier to guide. Take a simple example. You read a headline about economic instability. In that instant, your body reacts. Maybe your chest tightens slightly. Maybe your mind jumps to personal concerns. If you stay with that line of thought, replaying it, adding more meaning to it, you are feeding energy into that specific version of events. It becomes more than information. It becomes part of your lived experience, even if nothing in your immediate environment has changed. Now consider the opposite. The same headline appears, but instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You notice the impulse to engage, but you don't follow it right away. For a brief moment, there is space. In that space, the information has not yet solidified into stress. It remains just that, information. This small gap changes everything because it interrupts the automatic collapse. Try this in a very simple way. The next time something pulls your attention strongly, don't push it away and don't dive into it. Just watch the first reaction arise. Notice how your body responds before your mind builds a story. Stay there for a few seconds. You may feel the urge to resolve it, to think it through, to take control. But if you remain observing, something interesting happens. The intensity begins to shift on its own. This is not about ignoring reality. It's about seeing how your interaction with it defines its weight and meaning. The more unconscious the interaction, the more fixed everything appears. The more aware the observation, the more flexible it becomes. What once felt like an unchangeable situation starts to reveal small openings, small variations that were invisible before. But here's where it becomes critical. If this process continues unchecked, if your attention is constantly captured and collapsed into stress-driven patterns, the accumulation starts to build. What begins as small, repeated moments of tension doesn't stay small, it compounds. It organizes your internal state in a way that becomes harder to shift over time. And that raises an important point you can't afford to ignore. What happens when this constant collapse of stress and pressure is not interrupted? What does it do to your system when it becomes the default way you engage with reality day after day? And the situation becomes far worse if you do not regain control of your focus now. If you continue giving your attention to the chaos on the screens, your body will enter what physics calls entropy. The damage escalates rapidly. Today's small invisible stress crystallizes into tomorrow's illness and collapse, turning you into just another drained battery feeding the machine. Entropy, in simple terms, is the tendency of a system to move toward disorder when there is no conscious regulation. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds quietly, layer by layer, through repetition. Each moment of tension that goes unnoticed, each automatic reaction, each unresolved spike of stress adds a small amount of noise to your system. At first, it's barely perceptible, but over time, that noise accumulates and begins to interfere with how clearly you think, feel, and act. You might recognize this as that subtle mental fog that becomes more frequent. Decisions feel heavier. Focus becomes fragile. Even simple tasks require more effort than they should. This is not a lack of discipline or intelligence. It is a system that is losing coherence. Your energy is being scattered in too many directions, constantly pulled by external triggers that demand your attention without giving anything back. What makes this more dangerous is how normal it starts to feel. When disorder becomes familiar, you stop questioning it. You assume that being tired all the time is just part of life. That feeling emotionally reactive is unavoidable. That living in a constant low-level pressure is simply what reality is. But this is not a neutral state. It is a degraded one, and it shapes everything you experience from within. There's also a biological cost that cannot be ignored. When your body stays in prolonged stress, it doesn't just affect your mood. It alters your internal balance. Your sleep becomes less restorative. Your immune response weakens. Your nervous system loses its flexibility, making it harder to return to calm even when there is no immediate threat. Over time, the line between external pressure and internal state disappears. You carry the tension with you, even in silence. Notice how this escalation works in cycles. A stressful input captures your attention. Your body reacts. That reaction influences your thoughts, which then reinforce the feeling. You might try to distract yourself, but the underlying tension remains. The next trigger arrives and the cycle repeats, often with slightly more intensity. This is how entropy grows, not through one major event, but through countless small ones that never fully resolve. Take a moment and reflect on your last few days. How many times did your attention shift abruptly because of something external? A notification, a piece of news, a comment, a worry? And how many of those moments did you fully process and release, instead of carrying them forward into the next hour? This is where the accumulation hides, not in dramatic breakdowns, but in unfinished reactions that stack quietly in the background. There's an important detail here that most people overlook. As entropy increases, your perception of reality becomes more rigid. You start to see fewer options, fewer possibilities. Problems appear larger and more permanent than they actually are. This is not because reality itself has become more restrictive, but because your internal system no longer has the clarity to perceive alternatives. Disorder limits vision, and when vision is limited, behavior follows. You begin to choose what feels safe rather than what is aligned. You avoid uncertainty, even when it could lead to growth. You stick to patterns that feel familiar, even if they drain you. In this way, entropy doesn't just affect how you feel. It shapes the direction of your life in subtle but powerful ways. Pause for a second and notice your breathing again. Is it deep and steady or shallow and uneven? This simple signal tells you a lot about the state of your system. When entropy is high, even your breath reflects it. It becomes fragmented, mirroring the internal noise. And if your breath is fragmented, your attention will likely follow the same pattern. What's happening here is not random. It's a process. A gradual movement from order to disorder, from clarity to confusion, from presence to automatic reaction. And if nothing interrupts this trajectory, it continues to intensify. The system doesn't stabilize on its own. It keeps drifting. But here's the part that changes everything. Even in a state of high entropy, the structure of reality itself has not become solid in the way it appears. What feels dense, heavy, and unchangeable is not as fixed as your senses suggest. Beneath the surface of everything you see, there is far more space and movement than you've been conditioned to notice. But pay close attention to this, because here comes your first relief. Look at the obstacles around you right now. Science confirms that 99.9% of the composition of everything you see and fear is merely empty space and vibrating energy. Your problems only seem hard and impossible because your brain has been conditioned your entire life to decode only the densest frequencies of matter. From a very early age, your senses were trained to prioritize solidity. What you can touch feels real. What resists you feels permanent. What repeats itself feels unquestionable. Over time, your mind builds a model of reality based on this dense feedback. It learns to trust what appears fixed and to ignore what is subtle, fluid, or not immediately visible. This is useful for survival, but it comes with a hidden cost. It limits what you are able to perceive and therefore what you believe is possible. When you look at a problem, financial pressure, a difficult relationship, uncertainty about the future, it appears solid like a wall. Your mind treats it as something fully formed, already defined, already decided. But what you are actually seeing is a stabilized pattern, held together by repeated attention, emotional reinforcement, and interpretation. It feels dense because it has been observed the same way many times. There's a difference between something being present and something being fixed. Most people don't question this difference. They assume that because something exists in their current experience, it must also be rigid and unchangeable. But if you slow down your observation even slightly, you begin to notice small variations. The way you feel about the same situation shifts depending on your state. The meaning you assign to it changes. The intensity rises and falls. These are signs that what you're dealing with is not as solid as it first appears. Try something simple. Look at an object near you. It could be your hand, a table, or your phone. At first glance, it seems completely stable. But if you hold your attention there for a few seconds, your perception starts to soften. The sharpness relaxes. The sense of hard edges becomes less dominant. You're not changing the object itself. You're changing how your mind is organizing the experience. This small shift reveals something important. Solidity is not just a property of the object, it's a product of perception. Now bring that same awareness to a situation that feels heavy in your life. Instead of labeling it immediately as a problem, just observe the sensations it creates in your body. Where do you feel it? Is it tight, warm, restless? Notice how these sensations move, even if slightly. They are not frozen, they fluctuate. This is your direct evidence that what feels like a solid block in your reality is actually a dynamic process. The system relies on you not seeing this, because if everything feels dense and fixed, you are more likely to react with resistance or avoidance. You either push against the problem or try to escape it, both of which reinforce its presence. But when you begin to see the space within what you experience, your relationship to it changes. The pressure decreases, not because the situation disappears instantly, but because it loses some of its perceived weight. There's also a psychological layer to this illusion. Your brain prefers certainty, even if that certainty is uncomfortable. It would rather define a situation as bad but known than leave it open and undefined. So it fills in the gaps, solidifies interpretations, and creates a sense of closure where there might actually be flexibility. This is another way reality becomes more rigid than it truly is. Pause for a moment and notice how quickly your mind labels things: good, bad, difficult, impossible. These labels happen almost instantly, and once they are in place, they shape how you interact with everything that follows. But what if those labels are not final? What if they are just the first layer of interpretation, not the full picture? As you start to question the solidity of what you see, something subtle begins to open. You don't necessarily feel immediate relief, but you gain a small amount of space between you and the situation. And in that space, there is less automatic reaction, less urgency to fight or escape, just a bit more room to observe. And this is where a common misunderstanding begins to fall apart. Many people believe that the way to deal with a difficult reality is to push against it, to resist it with force, to fight harder than the pressure itself. It feels logical. If something is in your way, you confront it. But when what you are facing is not truly solid in the way it appears, that strategy starts to reveal its own limitations. This is exactly where everything you were taught about spirituality turns upside down. Common belief says that, to defeat the matrix, you must rebel, resist, and fight against injustice. But the truth that breaks every rule is the complete opposite. The universe is a thermodynamic mirror. Actively fighting the hologram creates friction and feeds it with energy. Fighting the system head-on is the greatest trap of all. It feels counterintuitive at first. If something is wrong, your instinct is to push back. If something limits you, you try to break it. That response is deeply wired into your biology. But when it comes to how you experience reality, this reflex can lock you even deeper into what you're trying to escape. Because resistance is not neutral. It carries emotional charge, tension, and focus. And whatever holds your focus with intensity tends to grow in your perception. Think about a moment when you strongly resisted something in your life. Maybe a situation felt unfair, or someone crossed a line, or circumstances didn't match what you expected. Notice how your mind kept returning to it. You replayed it, analyzed it, argued with it internally. Even when the situation wasn't physically present, it stayed active inside you. That's not because the event itself was powerful, but because your engagement with it kept it alive. This is where the reversal begins. What if the goal is not to overpower reality, but to stop feeding the patterns that make it feel rigid? When you fight something internally, you are still tied to it. Your attention remains locked. Your body stays activated. In a way, you are maintaining the very structure you want to dissolve. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ignoring what matters. It means changing the way you relate to what you experience. There's a difference between clear action and reactive resistance. Clear action comes from a stable state. It is precise, measured, and doesn't carry excess emotional weight. Reactive resistance, on the other hand, is driven by urgency. It feels intense, but often leads to more entanglement rather than resolution. Pause for a moment and bring to mind something that currently bothers you. Not the story around it, just the fact that it exists in your experience. Now notice your immediate reaction. Is there tension? A desire to fix, change, or push it away? Instead of following that impulse, just observe it. Let the reaction be there without acting on it. This might feel unnatural at first because you're interrupting a familiar pattern. As you stay with this observation, something subtle begins to shift. The situation doesn't disappear, but the grip it has on you loosens slightly. The urgency softens. This is not weakness. It's the beginning of a different kind of control, the kind that doesn't rely on force. The thermodynamic idea behind this is simple. Systems move based on energy flow. When you add friction through resistance, you increase internal noise. That noise reduces clarity and makes everything feel heavier. But when you reduce resistance, energy flows more smoothly. Your system becomes more coherent, and your perception of reality becomes less distorted. This is why fighting the system often strengthens it. Not because the system is unbeatable, but because the method being used keeps feeding the same loop. You're trying to break a pattern while operating from within it. The result is more effort, more exhaustion, and very little real change. There's also a psychological shift that happens here. When you stop seeing yourself as someone who must constantly battle reality, you begin to notice options that were invisible before. You're no longer locked into a single way of responding. There is space between what happens and how you engage with it. And in that space, new possibilities start to emerge, not as abstract ideas, but as practical alternatives in how you think, speak, and act. This doesn't require you to withdraw from life or avoid challenges. It asks you to meet them differently. Without the immediate need to resist, you can see more clearly what actually requires action and what is simply noise. That distinction alone can change the direction of your energy in a very real way. And yet, even with this understanding, there is a moment that tends to break most people's consistency. A moment when pressure rises suddenly, when something unexpected happens, and the old reaction wants to take over instantly. In that exact moment, the difference between staying in the loop and stepping out of it becomes very precise. It's not about philosophy anymore. It's about what you do with your attention right then. Remember that dangerous mistake of forcing the mind or fighting, which I hinted at in the beginning. The ultimate solution is not war. It is reaching what we call the 0 point. When a crisis appears, and instead of automatically panicking, you choose to simply observe the situation like a scientist. Without emitting emotion, you cut the power cable. The system instantly loses its access point to your biology. This point is not something mystical or distant. It is a very specific state where your attention is present but not entangled. You are aware of what is happening, but you are not immediately reacting to it. There is no rush to label, fix, or escape. For a brief moment, you step out of the automatic chain that usually defines your experience of reality. The challenge is that this goes against everything your body has been trained to do. When something unexpected happens, your system wants to move fast. It wants to predict, control, and protect. That impulse is strong, and it often feels like the only way to respond. But the 0 point exists exactly in the gap before that reaction takes over. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's always there. Think of a moment when something triggered you recently. Maybe it was a message, a financial concern, or a sudden change of plans. Normally, your reaction would be immediate, but imagine inserting a small pause right after the trigger, not to suppress anything, but simply to watch. In that pause, your body might still feel tension, your mind might start forming thoughts, but instead of following them, you stay with the observation. Try this now in a simple way. Bring your attention to your breath just for a few seconds. Don't change it. Just notice the air moving in and out. If your mind starts to comment or drift, let it, but keep a part of your attention on the sensation itself. This is a very light version of the 0 point. You are present but not pulled into reaction. What begins to happen in this state is a reduction of internal noise. The emotional charge that usually amplifies a situation doesn't fully activate. Without that charge, the situation doesn't gain the same weight. It remains more flexible, less defined. You are still aware of it, but it hasn't solidified into something overwhelming. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They think the goal is to eliminate emotion completely or to become indifferent. That's not what's happening here. Emotions can still arise, but they don't take control of your attention immediately. There is a difference between feeling something and being driven by it. The 0 point allows you to experience without being consumed. There's also a physical shift that accompanies this state. Your breathing tends to slow down, your muscles release some of their tension, your heart rhythm becomes more steady. These are not things you force. They happen naturally when your system is no longer reacting at full speed, and as your body stabilizes, your perception of reality begins to change with it. In this state, you start to see details that were hidden before. Options that didn't seem available begin to appear. A situation that felt urgent now has space around it. You can choose your response instead of defaulting to habit. This is where your actual influence begins, not through force but through clarity. There's an important detail to understand here. The 0 point is not something you reach once and hold forever. It's something you access repeatedly, especially in moments that matter. Each time you interrupt the automatic reaction and return to observation, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. Over time, this becomes more natural, less effortful. But in the beginning, it can feel uncomfortable. Without the usual reaction, there's a sense of uncertainty. You might feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're losing control. That feeling is part of the transition. It's the system adjusting to a different way of operating. If you can stay with that discomfort without immediately escaping it, something deeper stabilizes. Now consider what happens when you apply this not just once, but consistently. Each time you return to this neutral point, you prevent unnecessary energy from being fed into stress patterns. You stop reinforcing the same version of reality over and over again. Instead, you allow space for different outcomes to emerge, and this is where the shift becomes more noticeable. When your reactions decrease, the intensity of situations often changes as well. Not because the external world suddenly becomes perfect, but because your way of interacting with it is no longer amplifying every trigger. The weight begins to drop. At a certain point, something else starts to happen, something that feels almost unexpected. When you're no longer chasing solutions with urgency and no longer feeding problems with emotional energy, a different kind of connection begins to form between you and what surrounds you. It's not based on effort, but on alignment. And that connection starts to influence how things unfold in ways that are difficult to explain if you've never experienced it directly. The moment you remove the emotional reaction from the problem, its gravity and weight disappear. Mental tension drops drastically, and something magical happens. Your brain and heart enter absolute coherence. In this state of calm, you no longer need to desperately chase solutions. Quantum entanglement ensures that opportunities and synchronicities begin magnetizing themselves toward you. What changes here is subtle but very real. When your internal state is no longer fragmented by stress, your perception becomes sharper and more organized. You start noticing things that were always there but were filtered out before. A conversation carries a new meaning. An idea appears at the right moment. A small decision leads to an unexpected opening. These are often called coincidences, but they follow a pattern. They emerge when your system is coherent enough to recognize and act on them. This doesn't mean that reality suddenly bends to your will in a dramatic way. It means your interaction with it becomes more precise. Instead of scattering your energy across fear, doubt, and urgency, your attention moves in a more unified direction. And when your attention is aligned, your actions become cleaner. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of default. That alone creates a different chain of events. There is also a biological explanation behind this shift. When your brain and heart are in coherence, your nervous system operates with less internal conflict. Signals move more efficiently. Your body is not wasting energy managing constant stress responses. As a result, you feel more stable, more present, and from that state your decisions tend to be more accurate, even if you can't immediately explain why. Think about a time when you felt calm and clear, without pressure. Decisions during those moments often felt simple. You didn't overanalyze, you just knew the next step. Compare that to moments of stress, where even small choices feel heavy and uncertain. The difference is not in reality itself, but in the state from which you are engaging with it. Try something small right now. Bring to mind a situation you've been trying to solve. Instead of thinking through all the possible outcomes, shift your attention to your body. Notice your breathing, your posture, the tension or lack of it. Let your body settle, even slightly. Then look at the situation again without forcing an answer. You may notice that your perspective shifts, even if just a little. That shift is the beginning of alignment. As this becomes more consistent, you start to experience a different rhythm. You're no longer pushing constantly. There are moments of action and moments of stillness, and both feel natural. You don't interpret every pause as a problem. You don't treat every challenge as a threat. This creates a sense of flow that feels almost effortless compared to the constant struggle you may be used to. This is where the idea of entanglement becomes practical. It's not about distant particles influencing each other in a mysterious way. It's about how your internal state connects with the patterns around you. When you are in coherence, you are more likely to engage with people, information, and opportunities that reflect that same order. Not because they magically appear out of nowhere, but because you are now able to perceive and respond to them. There's also less resistance in your actions. You're not forcing outcomes, so there's less friction. Things either move forward or they don't, and you adjust without collapsing into frustration. This flexibility keeps your system stable, even when things don't go as expected. And that stability is what allows new paths to open without being immediately shut down by old reactions. But it's important to stay grounded here. This state is not about controlling everything or expecting perfect results. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be moments that challenge you. The difference is in how quickly you return to coherence when those moments arise. Instead of being pulled into long cycles of stress, you recalibrate faster. As you begin to live more from this state, something else becomes clear. The triggers that once pulled you instantly into reaction start losing their grip. Situations that used to dominate your attention no longer have the same access. It's as if a layer of distance has been created, not to disconnect you from reality, but to give you control over how deeply you engage with it. And this leads to an interesting shift. If your reactions are what give external events their weight and influence, What happens when those reactions are no longer automatic? What does it mean for your experience when the usual entry points of stress and fear simply don't activate the way they used to? When you master the art of not reacting to external triggers, you become vibrationally invisible and undetectable to the algorithm of fear. The economic crisis and society's panic continue happening out there, but they no longer find emotional locks inside you. You begin walking untouched through the middle of the fire, completely immune to mass programming. This doesn't mean you stop seeing what's happening. You still read the news, hear conversations, notice changes around you. The difference is that these inputs no longer hook into your system the same way. Before, each trigger would find a point of tension and expand it. Now the trigger arrives, but there is no immediate grip. It passes through your awareness without taking control of your state. Think about how algorithms work in general. They learn from your reactions. Every click, every pause, every emotional engagement teaches them what to show you next. The same principle applies to your internal patterns. The more you react to fear-based inputs, the more your mind and body expect and reinforce them. Over time, it creates a personalized loop of reality where the same types of stress keep appearing, not by coincidence, but by repetition. When you stop feeding that loop, the pattern begins to lose strength. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it no longer dominates your experience. You might still encounter the same situations, but your response is different. And because your response is different, the outcome often shifts in ways that feel subtle but significant. Notice how this changes your sense of stability. Instead of being pulled up and down by every external event, you remain more centered. There is a baseline of calm that stays with you, even when things around you are uncertain. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. You can act when needed, but you're not reacting out of pressure. There's also a psychological freedom that comes with this. When you are no longer constantly triggered, your mind has more space. You're not replaying the same concerns over and over. You're not anticipating problems before they happen. That mental space allows for clearer thinking, better decisions, and a more accurate perception of reality. Try to observe this in a simple moment. The next time you come across something that would normally disturb you, pause before engaging. Notice the initial impulse to react. Instead of following it, stay with the sensation for a few seconds. You may feel a slight discomfort, like you're not completing a Pravichnyi cycle. But if you remain present, that impulse begins to fade on its own. What you're doing in that moment is breaking a pattern that has likely been running for years. You're showing your system that not every trigger requires a reaction, and as this becomes more familiar, the intensity of those triggers starts to decrease. They lose their ability to control your attention. This is where the idea of becoming invisible starts to make sense. It's not about hiding from reality. It's about no longer being predictable to the patterns that once controlled you. If fear no longer gets a response, it has nothing to build on. If urgency doesn't activate your system, it loses its influence. You're still present, still aware, but no longer participating in the same cycle. There's also a shift in how you relate to other people. You begin to notice how often conversations are driven by shared stress, by reinforcing concerns, by amplifying uncertainty. Instead of being pulled into that dynamic, you can listen without absorbing it. You can respond without escalating it. This creates a different kind of interaction, one that is less reactive and more grounded. Over time, this changes how others perceive you as well. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle signals. You seem less affected, less hurried, more stable. And that stability can influence the environment around you, not by force, but by example. It creates a different tone in the space you occupy. But there's an important point to keep in mind. This is not about detaching from life or avoiding challenges. It's about engaging from a state that is not constantly being hijacked by external inputs. You still make decisions, face problems, and take action. The difference is that your actions are not driven by the same automatic patterns. As this becomes more consistent, you start to notice something else. The situations that once felt overwhelming now appear more manageable, not because they've disappeared, but because your relationship to them has changed. You're no longer inside the reaction. You're observing it and choosing how to engage. And from this place, a new level of interaction with reality begins to open. If you are no longer being controlled by the surface patterns, if your attention is no longer scattered or predictable, then the question naturally shifts. What happens when you start using that attention deliberately instead of just protecting it? What becomes possible when you're no longer just avoiding the system, but actually understanding how to work with its underlying structure? At this level of mastery, you stop being the confused avatar suffering inside the simulation and take the programmer's seat. Freeing your mind does not mean escaping to an isolated mountain. It means remaining in the middle of the world while seeing through the illusion, decoding the rules of reality in your favor, and manipulating matter through pure consciousness. This doesn't turn you into someone detached or distant. In fact, it does the opposite. You become more present, more aware of the small details that most people overlook. The difference is that now you understand that your attention is not passive. It is active. It selects, organizes, and gives weight to what you experience. And once you see that clearly, you stop using it unconsciously. Think about how a programmer works. They don't fight the system they're working with. They learn its logic, they understand its patterns, its limitations, its possibilities. Then they make small, precise changes that produce different outcomes. What you're doing here follows a similar principle, but instead of code on a screen, you're working with perception, attention, and response. The first shift is recognizing that your internal state is the interface. Every thought, every reaction, every interpretation passes through it. If your interface is noisy, rushed, or tense, the output will reflect that. But if your interface is clear and stable, your interaction with reality becomes more intentional. You're no longer reacting to everything equally. You begin to choose where to place your focus. This is where many people expect something dramatic, but the real change is subtle. It shows up in how you handle ordinary moments. A delay doesn't immediately become frustration. A challenge doesn't instantly turn into stress. You notice the impulse, but you don't automatically follow it. That gap you've been practicing becomes a tool, not just a pause. Try something simple in your next interaction. When someone speaks to you, instead of preparing your response while they're talking, give your full attention to what is being said. Notice the tone, the pauses, the intention behind the words. Then respond from that place instead of from habit. This small shift changes the quality of the exchange. It makes your response more aligned with what is actually happening, not just with your expectations. As you apply this kind of awareness more consistently, patterns start to reveal themselves. You begin to see how certain reactions lead to predictable outcomes. You notice how specific thoughts trigger familiar emotional states. And most importantly, you realize that these patterns are not fixed. They are loops that can be interrupted and redirected. There's also a level of responsibility that comes with this awareness. Once you see how your attention shapes your experience of reality, it becomes harder to blame everything on external circumstances. This is not about ignoring real challenges, but about recognizing your role in how those challenges are processed and lived. That recognition gives you leverage. Another important element here is precision. Hacking the source code is not about trying to control everything at once. It's about making small adjustments at the right moments. Catching a reaction early, shifting your focus before it spirals, choosing not to engage with a thought that would normally take over. These are subtle moves, but they have a cumulative effect. Pause for a moment and think about one pattern in your life that repeats often. It could be a type of stress, a conflict, or a way of thinking that keeps returning. Instead of trying to eliminate it entirely, just observe when it begins. What triggers it? What does it feel like in your body? What thoughts follow? This observation alone starts to loosen the pattern because you are no longer fully inside it. Over time, this creates a different relationship with your own mind. You're not trying to silence it or control it aggressively. You're learning how it works, and by understanding it, you gain the ability to guide it. This is where the idea of manipulating reality becomes grounded. It's not about forcing external change, but about aligning your internal processes in a way that naturally leads to different outcomes. There's also a growing sense of trust that develops here. Not blind trust, but a quiet confidence in your ability to navigate whatever arises. You don't need to anticipate every possible problem, because you know you can respond with clarity when something happens. This reduces the constant need for control and allows more flexibility in how you move through situations. As this deepens, your experience becomes less about reacting to what is in front of you and more about engaging with it consciously. You're still part of the system, still interacting with people, responsibilities, and challenges. But you're no longer operating on autopilot. You're aware of the inputs, the processing, and the output. And with that awareness, a new question begins to take shape. If you can observe the patterns, interrupt them, and redirect your attention with intention, then what you're really touching is the underlying structure that gives shape to your experience. Not just the surface events, but the way they are formed and sustained. The matrix will only continue draining your life while you surrender your consciousness to process its panic. The barriers limiting you were always nothing more than condensed light and information, and the key to rewriting them has always been the direction of your focus. Now that you understand the code, the great question is no longer, how do I escape? But rather, what kind of universe will you choose to collapse from this moment on? This is where everything becomes real. Not in theory, but in your next reaction, your next breath, your next choice. Reality responds to what you sustain with attention. If you stay present, clear, and grounded, the illusion loses structure. And little by little, you stop being controlled by it. If you made it this far, write in the comments, I choose to observe before I react. This shows you're not just watching, you're applying. If this connected with you, watch one of the videos on your screen now. And if you want to go deeper and support this work, consider becoming a member. Exclusive content is coming soon.